Hi everyone, I'm Jens. Pleasure to talk today. I'm going to talk about the true meaning of mixed reality. And as you can see from this picture, there are three things that are related to that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about myself first. So the first thing that you see is that apparently I work for Audi, which is seen by the beautiful S3 here in the background. I'm working in the Audi production lab, which is focusing on new technologies brought into production. And my topic for a couple of years now is augmented virtual reality. And in this space, I'm having quite a long time now. I started in 2009 with the research in this space at the High Performance Computing Center in Stuttgart. I'm quite familiar with the research in this space. I've worked in HMI-related things. So my interest is what is the interaction between the user and the computer. And augmented virtual reality is, of course, a very interesting, a very immersive and a new technology in a way that we now have new technologies available doing that, but AR and VR are, of course, much older than that. And the last thing that you see on this picture is the term science fiction. So I would refer to my work as science fiction, not only because I'm a big fan of science fiction, but also because the things that we do, or the things that I do at Audi, are trying to make fiction a reality through science, basically. And augmented virtual reality is a very good example of that. So you all have seen movies like Iron Man and Minority Report and so on. And basically, the user interface is a large part of the fiction described in those movies. So I basically have focused my work on the user interface, and we've seen a transition in this space over the last decades, ranging from the first computer line, command line interface, so very old stuff that it was developed in the 70s. The first computer that had a mouse, great stuff, developed in Xerox PARC. And all those technologies now going to a graphical user interface, although changing from the space that you interact with, so from 1D to 2D, they're still indirect. So if you use a mouse, you're actually clicking your button and then moving the cursor again and then interacting with stuff. This is much different now with the smartphone, with the iPhone, which was the first to introduce to the mass market touch interfaces, which is somewhat in between a transition that we see to natural user interfaces. And natural user interfaces incorporate, in my opinion, two things which are very important to the future of user interfaces. First of all, they're direct, so you can interact directly with the object that you want to play with, that you want to work with. And the second thing that is the space is changing. So we're now ranging from 2D interfaces to 3D interfaces. And that is very important because it is we're already interacting as human beings with the world that is not digital. Because the world that we live in, 3D is the world that we interact, so we understand everything inherently in 3 dimensions. So that's why it's actually called natural. That's something that we've seen come to life again with Oculus Rift and other things, HTC Vive, for example, that came afterwards. And this means that we're now seeing a trend towards new technologies that going in a broader mass. As I said before, this isn't really a new technology, so mixed reality, the term is actually quite old. It's been defined in 1994 by Paul Milgram. It's one of the most cited papers in the research community, AR and VR related. But one thing that struck to me in the class that I'm having at the Ingolstadt University, where I teach augmented and virtual reality, is that there is no mentioning of virtual reality, for example, which is now, I think, one of the most common terms to be used for this space. However, there is augmented virtually, which basically no one uses. And if you see today an increasing number of articles try to explain what is actually augmented reality, what is virtual reality, and what is mixed reality. So there seems to be a confusion about this, what actually is what. And I think that there is a need to have a common understanding for all those terms, because we're now, practically all of us are expert on that. We have dedicated our time developing stuff for that, and we're trying to sell this to people who are novices, amateurs, who have not that much experience with those technologies. But if you ask someone else, he would give you another definition of augmented reality or mixed reality than I would do. And the person next to him maybe have another definition of that. So what I found out basically is that there is a lack of common understanding in all this terminology. And that's why I want to talk about the true meaning of mixed reality, because a meaning starts always with a naming. So what actually does the term mixed reality mean? And for me, mixed reality is the combination of augmented reality and virtual reality. So no augmented virtual reality, no virtual environment. It's a whole basically new description based on what we experience today. Because augmented reality is the combination of the real world and the physical world. And what you've seen earlier, that if you use sensors to include real-world objects, that's nothing new to mixed reality. Mixed reality is basically the space that all those technologies are in. So you start with reality, where you have 0% immersion, and immersion is a very key thing here. I'm very happy that we have Mel Slater tomorrow, which I'm a big fan of. He has basically defined the term immersion almost 20 years ago, where he said that immersion is actually the degree of the virtual sensation. So when we have HMDs today, we have our visual senses immersed in a virtual world. But still, our ears, our skin, our smell, our touch, all of those senses are still in reality. So although we might be 100% virtually immersed optically, we're not in the rest. And that's an important fact, because if you see 100% immersion on the other side, which is the end of the mixed reality spectrum, which I call virtuality, as opposed to reality, in the virtuality, you're actually in the matrix. You cannot tell between reality and virtuality anymore, because it's, for you, not distinguishable. Because it includes all the senses that we have. And anything before that, so maybe having 80, 70% immersion, that is still virtual reality. That is the virtual reality that we experience today. We are seeing HMDs wearing on our heads and seeing virtual worlds, but we still feel the gravity of the real world, for example. We're still bound to the spaces that we can move in. And that is actually not 100% immersion. And that's why I want to propose this definition as what is mixed reality. Mixed reality is basically the space that we all work on, independent of its AR or being VR. And that's why I also abbreviate that with XR, because it's basically X for everything. There are a lot more terms, of course, so there's digital realities, extended realities, and so on. But I want to have this definition, at least from my side, as a proposal for us, the community, to be discussed, so that we have all the same naming, because it's very important that if we go out to people not experts in this, they're quite irritated by the naming conventions that we use today, because, as I said before, we have so many names and people are really having a hard time understanding what we actually mean. So my meaning number one, the true meaning of mixed reality, is that it incorporates all. But of course, meanings are not limited to just naming. If we look at what you could actually do with mixed reality, what it is good for, what is its purpose, then we have, in our work in the Audi production lab, looked at different technologies, ranging from the very easy things, wearable displays like Google Glass, to augmented reality like the HoloLens, or virtual reality like the HTC Vive. And when we looked at all these different technologies, we realized that wearable displays are not augmented reality. Those are basically just variable displays because they don't have an understanding of your real world. They are not 3D. They don't have tracking. They're basically non-immersive. And as I just described, non-immersive means reality, so not on the mixed reality spectrum. But they're good for many things. So what you can do is process guidance. We, for example, use that to guide our workers in assembly of very complex engines, where you need to have a step-by-step guide how to assemble those engines. And that's something that Google Glass is very good for because you can wear it all day. That's pretty much an 8 hours plus device, and you can have it, basically, the information's coming to you no matter what you do and where you are. You can do verifications, documentations with QR codes, for example, and you can have a remote expert talking to you. Augmented reality is semi-immersive, so it's kind of anchored in the virtual and the real world. And the devices that we see at the moment are, in my opinion, just good for an hour's use, maybe, not much more. I've not seen many people wear that longer than that, unless they really, really have to, but that's the minority of users. But you can do much more with that. Different things, but much more. So you can basically design, develop, plan. You can do product and process validation or improvements of your products and processes. You can do trainings, which is very important. You can do remote expert scenarios where you have someone in a remote location helping you with a complex task. And of course, you can also do process guidance. But the process guidance is, of course, limited to that hour. So it's maybe maintenance, what you do, and not really the process guidance of assembling the whole day. Virtual reality is similar in a way that you cannot wear that much longer than an hour continuously because it's eye straining, temperature, so there are a lot of things limiting the comfort in use. But they are highly immersive. What you can do with them is still different than augmented reality. So you can also design, develop, and plan, but you can do that in a space that is not anchored in the reality. So you can basically design plans, fabrication, manufacturing plans that are not existent, and you can design them. Whereas in augmented reality, you can update them, you can improve them, you can design new parts of the building and anchor them in the reality. Same applies for product process validation, trainings, and remote collaboration, which we see is very important in virtual reality, so that people in different locations, and we have 13 production plants worldwide, can have a discussion about things, how to do them, how to solve problems, and this is a very, very important application of mixed reality and virtual reality. In our work, we found that there are some common denominators in mixed reality applications. So things that are really the basic foundation of all those applications in the mixed reality space, independent of its AR and VR. I call them desires, based on human desires that we have when we enter this space. You can compare that to Maslow's hierarchy of desires or needs. And it is basically the foundation of everything, the number one desire that you have when you're in a virtual space, no matter if it's AR and VR, is that you feel well. You want to be safe. You want to have, for example, in this case, a low latency so that you don't throw up. Very important thing. You wouldn't actually write that on a must-have list because it's clear that you don't want to throw up when you're in VR. But still, that was not the case until a couple of years ago when the tech was ready. So that's the basic foundation, number one. Number two is really illusion. So when you enter a virtual space, you want to immerse in that. You want to feel present in that space. And for that, illusion is very important. I'm very happy that, again, we have Malsady tomorrow, who's the expert on illusions in virtual reality. So he can talk much more about that. But for us, it's important to be in a space that you can, for example, in VR not have been. As here shown, driving an R8 on the moon, which we showed at CES last year. So that's number two. You want to, independent of the application, you want to feel present in that application. You want to have the illusion of being there. The next thing is that, for example, so the things that you've seen now, you could say you could also do on a Gear VR, for example. so on a device that is not really tracked in 6 degrees of freedom. But as soon as you look at content and imagine a 360 video, my immediate reaction always is that I want to step out. I want to enter the space. I want to explore it. I want to see for myself. I want to see behind rocks. I want to see behind trees. I want to see behind walls. I want to encounter this whole space and explore it. And that is basically the desire of freedom. I want to be able to move around, to see for myself, and to experience for myself. Next thing, and this is, I think, something that we're now seeing developing more. The rest, which I talked about, is already available on the market. So we have HMDs that are low latency. We have HMDs that are basically creating a feeling of presence. And we have devices that I can move freely around, as I've just showed us. But what we have not seen for the moment is that expression, that I want to express myself in the virtual world. So imagine being in a VR space that you can move. The next thing that you want to do is actually touch the stuff, interact with that, change the world, express yourself in that world. And intuitive interaction is a very vital important part of that. We've seen controllers do that, but the really intuitivity of that is not as in the real world. So in the real world, I do not have a controller in my hand and controlling everything. In the real world, I just have my hands and try to interact with that. I have tools that I use for different stuff, for example, a pen writing. And in VR, we do not have that at the moment. We're trying to get there, and there are many concepts out there, great stuff that is being worked on. But this is really the next step that we're currently seeing, where we see, okay, expression is the thing that the industry is really developing for. The very last thing, and to me the most important thing in here, is number 5, and the last part of that is togetherness. I think that being together in a virtual space is the most important part in the whole mixed reality space. Because if you have experienced something alone in VR, that might be cool, you might be telling your friends about it, they might have experiences or not, but it really changes the whole subject if you have experienced it with someone else together. Last year I played Star Trek Bridge Crew here at Gamescom, and I had 3 other players that played it with me. And that was a really defining moment for me, because 3 complete strangers that I have never seen before, we worked together and solved a task. I think we saved some people from Klingon crew or something like that. But it really created a feeling of being a team, of being together and trying to solve a challenge that we wouldn't have done in the real world. And this, I think, shows best that if we have figured out 1 to 4, then the most important part, the really killer application for mixed reality, will be to make this space social, to create a place that we experience together. And I can only give you that example that maybe describe the importance of that. Most of you have been to a cinema, I suppose. And for me, the cinema is the most unsocial place that you could have. So you're going in there, you're not talking for 2 hours with the one that accompanies you. You go out, and you're not supposed to talk, you're not supposed to interact, you're just staring at a screen, and that for that amount of time. There are not many things in life where you actually do that, but still people go there together. The minority of people I ever asked and said, yes, I'm going to cinemas alone regularly. So usually what you do, you go with someone else, because the experience of doing this together is so inherent in ourselves, in our human nature, that being together is really the most important part, I think, of what makes us human. So those are the 5 desires that we found out is the foundation of mixed reality, and which is important for us to consider in all the applications that we do, to find solutions to make our applications great with those 5, developing for those 5 desires. You can see an example of that for using VR as a tool, and I think that is the purpose of mixed reality as such, is a tool for doing stuff. So for example, at our booth here at DIGILITY, you see logistics training, which we implemented with HTC Vive, and where you can actually train to be a logistics employee at Audi and see how complex such an easy task is. Because there are a lot of steps that you need to think of, a sequence that is important to care for, and this is really something that we've been developing for a while now together with Interactive, and it's a great technology. It's a great application, and it really addresses a lot of the points I just showed you. Today, we're going to show you this with HTC Vive controllers. Tomorrow, you will see that with Manus VR gloves. So we have managed to implement a prototype. It's still testing, so don't expect it to work flawlessly. But you can experience the same thing that you did today, tomorrow with gloves with your hand, and see the difference, and see how that works out for you, and see what that makes a difference for you and experience this application. And there's also another application that I want to talk about, which shows you the difference of being together. In this application, you usually have a trainer, which is not immersed in the virtual reality, and the trainee, of course, which is working in VR. Those two don't see each other. See for yourself what you think of that. I have brought a video, and I hope this will work, with me that shows the next step of that. So virtual collaboration inside VR. And yes, perfect, thank you. So what you're seeing here is, again, HTC Vive. We're a really big fan of that. And what we do here is a product and process validation application. So we have a car coming from our engineering team. And this is a part of that. So it's actually a dashboard of an Audi Q2. And this is complete virtual. And I have tools with me that I can, for example, introduce a cutting plane and draw some lines with pens. But I not want to do that alone, because all the applications that we're basically seeing require collaboration. There is not a single use case of all I showed you that are just for one person. All of the use cases that we looked for in mixed reality basically require, at some stage, including different people inside that. Because it's always a team decision, a team effort in developing such a complex product as a car. And this is what we do here. Basic avatars, basic graphic visualization, but it shows you that you can actually work inside VR together at the moment. This is now possible. This is not something that we do in the future. This is limited, of course. We have some in the works that will, I think, blow your mind in the future. Be prepared to see the work of Capture, for example, which is doing really amazing work, and which gives another dimension to that in the future. So basically what we talked about here is the second meaning of mixed reality, which is actually its purpose. So in my opinion, mixed reality is really great for collaboration. Collaboration in virtual reality, which is also the topic of our hackathon this year that we're organizing together with DIGILITY. And thank you for all of the organization team on that. That's been really a great time, and I hope that we can see the amazing results of this tomorrow here at DIGILITY main stage. But collaboration for us not only means that we collaborate inside virtual reality, but I also want to express that collaboration is important as a European community. I think that we need to collaborate together, work together on the whole mixed reality space to make it great. Because it's not said that virtual reality will really reach all the expectations that we have on this technology at the moment. I think it really can go right, it really can be successful, but it doesn't have to be. It's up to us, up to the developers, up to the designers, up to the users, up to the politicians, all the people in this space, that we have a team effort in designing this, in making this great. And I think Europe really has the ingredients in being a great place for this to work on. We have the technology here in some parts, as you see here in DIGILITY, and I think this is really the best place to experience what we already have in Europe. So I'm really looking forward to working with the innovative partners that we meet here today and in the future, and to do something like the hackathon continuously, to have a big hackathon the year out around European communities, and to really create great stuff that really shows us what the potential of this technology is. So that's the purpose for now. But of course, there is a minor part, and I'm going to finish with that, about the future of mixed reality. The second was purpose. The third is really the future and the question, what is this technology bring us? Will that be a new reality? And I'm a big fan of the technology itself. I use it really, really often. And I see what's coming out there, and I'm really excited to see all the developers working on that. But I also want to stress that this technology doesn't necessarily have to be a good thing for us. Mixed reality can make our life great, but it also can make our life much worse than it is today. As you see in this picture, you can literally have someone walking that you would have liked to meet for years and years, but you wouldn't notice because you're so immersed in the virtual space that you actually lose connection to reality. You actually are inside a space that is creating your own reality. You're really imprisoned in that world, in that moment that you cannot really see what's going on around you. We're seeing that with social media at the moment, things like Facebook, all those bubbles, having same opinions, having built those opinion groups. And imagine that taking a step forward and having not an opinion group, but just your own opinion. And you can immerse yourself in a world where everything works out the way you want to. And you don't have to discuss or argue with anyone because you can just retract to that virtual space and you're alone there. I think that's really something that we need to look out for, that we need to care for as a designer, as a developer, to make this experience in a way that it works with the way we live today, that it is still a human technology helping us, not really imprisoning us. So that's why I want to propose really something obvious. We live in a shared reality today. So you all see me, and if I'm now saying something stupid, you would all hear that, you would all laugh, you would all make fun of me, which is totally okay for me, which is part of the experience. Inside a virtual reality, that is not necessarily the way. But this concept of a shared reality where we all experience the same, this should be also our guiding path for the future. Because the reality that we live in is great. It's the greatest reality we have. And it's, the only reality we have, where sometimes your clicker won't work, but that's okay. And how great the reality can be, I just experienced a couple of weeks ago when my daughter was born. She's now 8 years old, and she's the most wonderful kid that I could imagine. And most of the times, it's great. Sometimes I cannot sleep that well. Sometimes she's really crying really loud. But other than that, she's really, really great. And I wouldn't miss that for anything virtual in the world, because that's really an experience that I can tell really was life-changing for me. And I would want every one of us to have those feelings be kept for future generations. That you can walk with your kid down the street, down the beach, that you can see, feel, and smell this moment where you actually live in. And I hope for us that we all together can create a future that it is worth living in, that we all want to live in. And this will be my message to you. We started that with a hackathon, and I want to continue that into the future. It's up to us to basically define the future that we want to live in. Thank you.